Welcome to Central News. I'm Hilary Entwistle. In today's news, increasing pressure on Waikato's coastal environment will need to be managed carefully, particularly on the Coromandel Peninsula. Waikato Regional Council's Resource Use and Environmental Monitoring Committee was told. Currently, the council spends about $4 million a year on managing and monitoring the health of the marine environment in the region. The Coromandel was often referred to as the playground of the Waikato, Auckland and beyond, but increasing development pressures highlighted the need for its management and protection for a range of economic, cultural, recreational and environmental reasons. Coast and Marine Program Manager for the Waikato Regional Council, Peter Singleton, says there are many factors that impact on the Coromandel marine areas.
Well, what we have at this point in time is a whole lot of small impacts on the coast. Now, each one of themselves isn't a concern, but collectively they become a problem, and over time they become a problem. So while there's no urgent crisis, there is a growing need to do more, and the impacts, because they're coming from all different places, they're coming from the land, they're coming from the settlements, they're coming from the sea. We need to have quite a good integrated look at everything and an integrated approach. So that means everybody needs to play their bit, not just council. It's the local communities, it's the people who use the land, and it's the people who use the sea.
One of Rotorua's most iconic tourism drawcards is set to take its 15 millionth ride this month. The world's first luge operation, which opened 28 years ago in Rotorua, is celebrating the milestone with 2 competitions and a special giveaway. Based on electronic record taking, the milestone is expected to fall sometime in April. And the lucky person who completes the ride will win a trip for 2 to Queenstown, including return flights from Auckland to Queenstown. Now for our region's weather, Hamilton, your Wednesday, more showers than today is predicted and westerly. Your expected high is 20 and an overnight low of 13. Tauranga, Wednesday is looking wet again with showers becoming frequent and a northeasterly. Your expected high is 21 and an overnight low of 15. Just here, keeping children safe this winter. Welcome to Central News on TV Central. Every year in New Zealand, around a classroom of children is admitted to hospital due to unintentional accidents. Amy spoke with 2 people who deal with these cases every day.
Kiriyama, tell us about the current statistics of unintentional injuries to children in New Zealand each year.
Research shows that New Zealand children are twice as likely to die from an injury than children in Australia, 3 times likely to die from an injury than children in England. Over 3,500 children are admitted to hospital every year for moderate to severe injuries, and on average 1 child would die every 5 days from unintentional injury.
And where do most of these accidents take place?
Okay, motor vehicles are the #1 child killers, accounting for 1 in 5 child fatalities.
Can you explain the type of accidents that happen around the home?
The most common accidents that occur in the home are falls, as well as cutting and piercing. A lot of kids tend to fall from bunks, stairs, trip over objects lying around, and it seems that children have easy access to sharp objects.
And explain to me, what does your role involve?
Okay, so my role involves advocating on behalf of whānau, as well as mediating on their behalf and assisting to enable whānau to achieve a greater well-being.
Now, Kevin, as a fire investigator, you must see some horrific scenes. So what are some of the most common accidents that you see in your job?
Some of the most common accidents, common causes of fire is I suppose, negligence in the home, where children do become victims of things that adults do wrong. Things like leaving cooking unattended in the kitchen, going to sleep with cooking on the stove. Children in the house were not necessarily directly involved with that activity, but they do become victims of I suppose, the consequences of that happening, which is alarming for us. That's why we try to educate people out in the community to keep looking when they're cooking and to have smoke alarms in their homes and to plan and practice escape plans.
And can you explain what your job involves?
My job involves basically working with our communities to help them to protect what they value. It's about getting fire safety messages into people's homes, whether that's through their children, through our Firewise programs through schools, and our Get Out, Stay Out program through preschools, working with building owners, building occupants, ensuring compliance in those areas, generally making people aware of their obligations with regards to being safe in their communities and in their homes when it comes to fire.
So how preventable would you say these accidents are?
They're all preventable. We have to be aware of what's going on around us. We have to be aware of the consequences, the risks involved, especially with fire. As we know, fire can be our friend, keeps us warm, helps us cook, but then again it can quickly turn and be our enemy if we disrespect it or we're not responsible with the activities that we're carrying out involving fire.
And why do you think these accidents increase through the winter?
Winter time, we like to keep ourselves warm. It's as simple as that. We've got open fires, we've got heaters, we've got all sorts of things contributing. The weather plays a part, obviously, with cold weather, but also drying clothes. People are hanging clothes perhaps too close to fireplaces and things like that. So, that type of stuff needs to be a metre away. And yes, general fireplaces, carelessly disposing of fireplace ashes is another fire cause during the winter. People need to be aware that fireplace ashes can start another fire up to 5 days after they think they've gone out. So it's important to dispose of those correctly.
Now, Kiriyama, what simple tips do you have for parents wanting to child-proof their home?
Okay, so they're pretty simple, really. Keep lighters, sharp objects, poisonous objects, medications out of reach of children. If you can, get yourselves one of those gates that you put at the bottom and at the top of the stairs to prevent kids from falling, as well as check out the Safe Kids website. They're full of tips on their website.
And how important would you say active supervision is?
Active supervision is one of the most, if not the most important roles that a parent could take in regards to supervising kids.
Okay. Kevin, from what you see in your job every day, what message would you like to put across to parents and caregivers?
We'd like the parents and caregivers obviously to be aware of the dangers of matches and lighters and what can go wrong if they get into the wrong hands, into little hands basically. So they need to ensure that those items are kept well clear of children. And if children have got fire lighting propensities or they have got, they do like to play with fire, we've actually got a program called the Fire Awareness Intervention Program that parents and caregivers can refer their children to us, and we've got trained facilitators that will work with those children to get them out of that bad habit. All they'd have to do is contact their nearest fire station or visit our website, which is fire.org.nz.
For more information on burn support, go to burns.org.nz. Coming up next, our local government reform special. Welcome back. The local government reform bill is well underway. We have put together a local government reform special for you. I have asked all the mayors and chairmen of our regions for their opinion on some of the changes made to the Local Government Act, and we will bring you an interview every night for the next couple of weeks. Tonight we have the Mayor of Hamilton City Council, Julie Hardacre.
So there are different schools of thought on what the purpose of local government is. What do you think the purpose of local government is?
Well, we've got this change of purpose, of course, that came in November, and the difficult thing is not all the words have been defined in the Act. So it's a bit of a $64 million question as to what does it actually mean. And of course the key one we're all looking at is local public service. What does that actually mean? And to be frank, I don't actually know what that means. And no one in local government actually knows. It's the subject of interpretation. So I think we're all playing a bit of a waiting game. I think a few of us kind of have a sense of what it maybe isn't, but what it maybe is a little bit more difficult to define. And I also think it is very much community specific. Because what might be local public service in Auckland or Dunedin may not necessarily be the case in Hamilton and vice versa. So I think that's where we're all struggling at the moment. But our council is going to go through a complete review of all the services and activities it currently does in this calendar year and work through a bit of an analysis of whether we think certain things we do actually do fit with that purpose. And I think that will be a really helpful exercise.
Part of the local government reform bill is to reduce public debt and public spending of the last decade. What is your council doing to ensure that you are reducing your debt?
Well, of course, the good news is that we've already dealt with all of this stuff. So last year when we signed off our 10-year plan, this was a complete change to the way we had approached our finances in the past, and our council made a concerted and deliberate effort to really look very closely at the way we managed the financial services and the whole budget in the city. So we've actually done all that work. So we've taken $15 million out of the operating budget. We've cut the capital works budget in half. We've capped our debt, and we've set a consistent rate increase to meet the services that we deliver for the city across the whole 10 years, exactly the same rates increase every year. We've also worked out a program to return to surplus, and we will be doing that by 2017. So actually we've dealt with all of these issues and we've done a very good job of that.
Do you think an amalgamation of the councils like in Auckland would benefit your ratepayers?
Well, again, this is another question that we're all grappling with, you know, and there's no yes-no answer to that. And so I think what fits for one area might not necessarily fit for another. But I think when we look at the Waikato, and there's 25,000 square kilometres within the Waikato Regional Council boundary, there's different communities of interest within that very wide region. We're not all the same. We've certainly got a very large dairy sector. We've got one very large urban presence, which is ourselves, Hamilton. We've got lots of smaller rural settlements, and then we've got huge expanses of land that isn't even utilised for farming. So it's a mixture. But my personal opinion is I think there are efficiencies to be gained, cost savings to be gained, if there is some reorganisation within the Waikato region. One of the things that the region is doing is the Mayoral Forum has got together, and we're working on a program to think through and properly analyse these issues. What is the Waikato? What actually is it? Where are our communities of interest? What is the best governance structure? Are there efficiencies through other means? So we're working through that now, and I think that that's a good process. For me, I'm a person about the data, the analysis and the evidence, not just a random decision because I think it might be the good thing. But personally, I think there are some opportunities for our region, and I'm hoping in the next few years we capitalise on those.
Do you think an amalgamation runs the risk of losing representation?
Well, that's the debate. That's actually the heart of the debate. If I'm bigger, do I lose my local representation and my access to democracy through that representation? And that's why we see in the Super City a number of community boards, because they represent the local community. So I think if there is any reorganisation of the Waikato, it is going to have to very fairly and squarely and upfront address that issue about representation. What we do know in the Waikato is we have a lot of the population based in and around Hamilton, and then it's a very sparse throughout the rest of the Waikato. And those communities are different. So there will need to be, if there is reorganisation, a mechanism to deal with those local communities in their community.
What do you think are some of the factors that have contributed to rate increases nationally since 2003?
Oh, absolutely, fairly and squarely, infrastructure, growth. So for our city, we're the second fastest growing city in New Zealand. We continue to be exponentially popular for people to live here and to grow, do business. So what that means is the cost to accommodate that growth through roads and wastewater and water and all of those infrastructure supports that go into living cost an awful lot of money. So for us and our council, that is the single most important factor that's contributed to the growth of those sorts of things. And I mean, this is an issue throughout New Zealand for growth councils. We're not alone in that. Tauranga, Queenstown Lakes, another one. Auckland, another one.
The latest Labour Cost Index shows local government costs rising over the past 3 years at nearly double the rate of the core state sector. What percentage of increase has your council had?
Of rates increases? Well, as I said before, we've kept our rates increase for the next 10 years, starting last year and into this year at 3.8%, and that's the total. So you've got to compare apples with apples. Our council doesn't run a targeted rate system. So we're a total rates, one rate, whereas lots of other councils have targeted rates. So you've got to look at the whole total and add them all up. Often councils don't increase the general rate but increase the targeted rates. So you've got to add them all up together. So I think when you look at our council, our rates increases are very much connected with our growth. Do I think we can get to a position where that could be neutral? That would depend on the increase in costs throughout the services and the products and commodities that we buy to deliver. So, for example, we do lots of roading here. The cost of bitumen has increased 800% over the last few years. So that's not CPI stuff, that's serious stuff. The cost of concrete, which we buy a lot of as well. So these are things that go into the mix that drive our costs. But I think we've done a very, very good job of driving efficiencies through our organisation, and we're very cost conscious. We are very competitive about the pricing that we go out and get to deliver our services. And we have a lot of volunteers in the city who deliver great things for the city. So it's kind of a big mix that goes into keeping the cap on a lot of these things that I think ratepayers get concerned about.
Tomorrow night is Hugh Vercoe, the Mayor of the Matamata Piako District. Just ahead, safety on the water in the Waikato, the new enforcer. If you have just joined us, welcome to Central News. Waikato Regional Council is the first local government authority in New Zealand to be given extra powers by Maritime New Zealand to investigate serious incidents on the water. Amy spoke with the council's navigation safety manager.
Hi Nicole, now tell us about the Regional Council's new increase to maritime responsibilities.
There were incidents that occurred on the regions of the Waikato waterways that were serious enough for people to require medical attention. Maritime New Zealand and the New Zealand Police were, unfortunately, they've got a lot of resourcing constraints and they deal with fatalities, and they weren't available at that time. This sort of highlighted to the Waikato Regional Council and Maritime New Zealand that there was a potential gap, and there was some sort of mid-level offending that wasn't being investigated.
So can you tell me a bit more as to why this was necessary?
Okay, so because there was this section of incidents that were going unmonitored and largely uninvestigated, the Waikato Regional Council has the function of navigation safety delegated to it by Maritime New Zealand, and so it's really important to us that the people in our region feel safe on the waterways, and if I guess it was a way to, it's important that people were held accountable for their actions on the water in the same way they would be on the road.
So what does this mean for the Regional Council?
So it means that we're able to step into that role more easily. We were before, but this just means that it's a more seamless approach. It means that we've got more tools available to us, from education right the way through to enforcement. Education is a large part of what we do. We want to make sure that people know how to be safe on the water so that they go home safely to their family at the end of the day. But incidents do happen, and largely that's because people don't know the rules or they choose to ignore them. So this was a way for us to sort of cover all of that whole spectrum of things, from that low-level offending where it would just normally be a fine, through to putting people before the courts where it's warranted. And
where's the council's jurisdiction?
So our area covers all of the Coromandel, coastal waterways and inland, through Waikato from port, from Tuakau, right the way through all of the Waikato River, right the way down to the mountains, but not including Lake Taupo.
So what was the process to gain this increase?
Waikato Regional Council approached Maritime New Zealand to discuss the merits of it. We had some ideas about how that could work and how we could form a better partnership together. We've sort of discussed that, and the correct clauses within the Maritime Transport Act were sort of discussed and then chosen from there, and then it was just about the process of how that actually happens, to going through the right legislation to make it happen.
And how long have these new powers been available to council members?
We officially got them in December 2012, so just before the start of the busy season. And they were signed off then by the Director of Maritime New Zealand, Keith Manch.
And what benefits have there been so far?
Ease of investigation comes to mind. Any potential barriers were removed. Probably an example is a a case that's already been before the courts where we had the need to go onto private property to take photographs for evidential purposes of two vessels that had hit each other head on, and it meant that if the people had been resistant to us doing that, then we could have easily gone to the court and get a search warrant. But they were very cooperative and they wanted to and have it investigated so that we could all learn from it.
So how were council staff assessed as having the skills to exercise these new powers?
So 4 staff members have been selected so far. They are already members of the council staff that are performing a similar duty under the Resource Management Act. So they're very experienced in collecting evidence, doing interviews and putting those files together to go before the court where it's warranted. Their CV along with a resume were given to Maritime New Zealand, and Maritime New Zealand went through and assessed them against what their investigators would have to go through to become an investigator for Maritime New Zealand, and then those particular people were given the warrants.
And what is the training process?
So the training potential new candidate would have to show that they have got similar skills under another legislation and that they could perhaps become conversant with the Maritime Transport Act. And they'd have to follow the same process, provide their CV, and Maritime New Zealand would go through and assess them.
So what challenges do you think you might face with the joining of the various organisations?
We're very lucky that we have a really good relationship with Maritime New Zealand and the New Zealand Police in our area. So when an incident happens, one of us will be the first to know about it, and we've also had incidents where the media has been the first to know about it and we've read about it. So we've all got a liaison person and we'll discuss who's got it. So if it's a fatality, then the New Zealand Police have the obligation to investigate under the Coroners Act. So we would certainly not be involved in a fatality. We have helped New Zealand Police in the past where they've needed to get access to a particular spot on the water, so we'll act as their skippers and they'll use our boats to go in there. Maritime New Zealand have got quite a busy portfolio looking after the fatalities as well and commercial activity, where they've also got a responsibility with health and safety. So a lot of times, although it seems like some of our areas may sort of blur over, recreational is the sort of area that Waikato Regional Council will have its main area, and we'll certainly get the assistance of the Maritime New Zealand, and the police are very, very supportive of us in that field, just because of the amount of resource and impacts that it has. And also we've been doing some discussing what we're going to be doing over this Christmas and looking at doing voluntary breath assessments of skippers on the water, because that's certainly one of the areas where we're finding a lot of accidents are happening because there isn't a legal limit at the moment for skippers when it comes to alcohol.
Visit waikatoregion.gov.nz to find out more information. That is the news for today. We really want you to be involved, so like us on Facebook and let us know your views. If you have news including your own video and photos, go to our website and hit upload. Thanks for joining us. I will be back tomorrow night with more guests from in and around the regions. I'm Hilary Entwistle. Have a lovely evening.
This has been an Alpha Media production, a division of Television Media Group.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.